I'm Deacon Jeff. Greetings on this lovely, warm Wednesday summer morning. Summers, traditionally the time to spend a little downtime, some vacation, maybe with family, friends. I know that for my family, when our kids were little, it was the time of year to make our annual pilgrimage down to the North Carolina shore, the Outer Banks. But now that our kids are kind of launched and off on their own, my bride, Lucy, has decided that she actually enjoys cruising. And so we've had some really wonderful experiences on cruise ships. We really enjoy getting up early in the morning before the sun comes up, going up into the crow's nest, having a little croissant and some coffee, and watch the sun come up over the water, or before dinner, going up to the crow's nest and having a little before dinner drink, going out on the excursions, and just really sightseeing and taking it easy and enjoying ourselves. And we've developed a preference for one particular cruise line because, as far as we know, it's the only cruise line that has a Catholic priest on board 24/7. So we get to go to daily mass. And a couple of years ago, we took a really neat cruise out of Montreal, Canada, all the way out to St. Lawrence Seaway, out into the Canadian Maritime provinces, and then down the East Coast through Arcadia National Park, and eventually ended up in Boston, Massachusetts. But it was no ordinary cruise. See, it was sponsored by a fairly well-known national Catholic group, and they had well-known Catholic speakers on board, including Tim Staples and Patrick Madrid, who some of you may be familiar with. Patrick is an acquaintance of mine. I've met him in the past, booking him for certain speaking engagements. So we actually got to have a drink with he and his family, and it was really a great time. And the theme of the cruise, very appropriate to where we were cruising, was the North American martyrs. So each day, while we were at sea or cruising, the speakers would give a talk on some aspect of the North American martyrs who did missionary work in the early and mid 1600s in southern Canada and northern New York State, which is where we were, right up the St. Lawrence River. On one side was New York, the other side was Canada or Quebec. And we heard about these 8 Jesuit missionary priests from France who came to the United States and Canada in order to try and convert the Native American First Nation citizens to Catholicism. And they worked mostly among the Algonquin and Huron tribes, who were primarily fishermen and farmers, and they were able to have a little success. But it was really troubling times among the First Nation people back in those days. You see, the Iroquois Confederation was very powerful and was doing raids on neighboring villages of tribes that were not part of the Confederation. And in the eastern part of North America, the Mohawks were a very warlike member of that confederation. They would often raid the Algonquin and the Huron tribes. As a result, these 8 Catholic Jesuit priests were captured by the Mohawks. Probably the 2 best known of those priests were Isaac Jogues and Jean de Brébeuf. Isaac Jogues and Brébeuf's stories are quite moving. Jogues was kept prisoner for several months by the Mohawks, tortured, ritual torture. Won't get into too many of the details, at least now. Our speakers did. And suffice it to say that it involved burning, removal of body parts, pretty tough stuff. Jogues was eventually ransomed by a group of Dutch traders, made his way back to Europe, to France, where he recovered his health, in spite of the fact that he was missing most of his fingers, and came back to the missions to continue the missionary work among the native people. He was again captured by the Mohawks and eventually tomahawked to death. Jean de Brébeuf, also captured by the Mohawks, was tortured to death. He was strangled by having a burning torch pushed down his throat. Now, of course, these stories went on at great length and in much more detail than I've shared with you, but suffice it to say that I was incredibly impressed by the depth of the faith of these men who were trying to bring the truth of Christ to these people who had not heard about him. And were not only willing to suffer to do so, it said that John D. Brebeuf said that I have a strong desire to suffer and die for Jesus Christ. Well, it might come as a surprise to you because it came as a great surprise to me that near one of the last days of the cruise, one of our speakers told us that these 8 North American martyrs were in fact pretty much failures because they really didn't convert many of the First Nation citizens to Catholicism. And I was shocked by that statement, that they were basically failures. Coincidentally, the next morning we went to Mass on the ship and we celebrated the feast that we celebrate today of the North American saint, Kateri Tekakwitha. Kateri Tekakwitha was born around 1650 in a Mohawk village in northern New York. Her father was the chief of the Mohawks, but her mother was actually an Algonquin who had been captured in a raid and brought back to the Mohawk village, a Christian Algonquin. Now, these North American martyrs were all martyred in the late 1640s. Kateri Tekakwitha was born in 1650 or so. And I began to wonder how her mother could have possibly been exposed to Christianity. And it occurs to me that there were only 8 missionary guys in that part of the world at the time. I thought it was interesting that Kateri Tekakwitha, this great saint whose feast we celebrate today, is a great example to us, who gave her life to Christ, who became a consecrated virgin, was willing to suffer much abuse from the Mohawk tribe among whom she lived because of it, exists because these 8 guys failed. Funny how we measure failure and success, especially in the faith life, isn't it? You know, there's another saint that we are all pretty familiar with, I think, named Mother Teresa. There's a story that at one time she was going around doing her daily work among the poor and the dying of India, and she had agreed to let a reporter from the New York Times come and do a story on her and her mission. And he was finding himself to be in despair because, in spite of all the work that Mother Teresa and her nuns did, bringing in these poor, these starving, these leprous, these sick, these filthy people, cleaning them up, treating their wounds, trying to relieve their suffering, almost all of them died. And he said to her, "How can you put up with all the failure? You're having no success here." And it is reported that she said to him, "We are not called to be successful. We are called to only be faithful." Mother Teresa may never have converted many Hindi in India, but look at the impact that her life has upon the world today. I think hardly any human being that lives in a place where they have access to any media at all doesn't know about Mother Teresa. The 8 North American martyrs may not have converted many of the First Nation citizens to Catholicism, but look at the impact that their work had in giving us this great saint whose feasts we celebrate today, Kateri Tekakwitha. In our gospel today, Jesus calls a small group of his disciples to reveal to the world what the Father has revealed to Jesus and Jesus has revealed to them. Just a small group. Other places in Scripture, he tells them to go out and make disciples, to feed his sheep, to feed his flock. I don't know of any place in the Scripture where it tells us to count his flock, just to remain faithful, just to feed his flock. And we all, as disciples of Christ, like Mother Teresa, like the North American martyrs, are called to only be faithful. How successful our faithful lives may end up being isn't really for us to judge, and certainly isn't to be judged by numbers. Jesus just calls us to remain faithful, to feed his flock. No place does he tell us to count his flock. May you have a blessed day.